And some return by the falling light, some in the waking dream, for she hears the heels of the dripping ghosts that ride the rough roof beam. Kipling. They were the brawlers and the braggarts, the loud boasters and hard drinkers of Faringtown. John Coolrick and his crony Lylip Canoe. Many a time have I, a tousled-haired lad, stolen to the tavern door to listen to their curses, their profane arguments, and wild sea-songs, half fearful and half in admiration of these wild rovers. All the people of Faringtown gazed on them with fear and admiration, but they were not like the rest of the faring men. They were not content to ply their trade along the coasts and among the shark-teeth shoals. No yawls, no skiffs for them. They fared far farther than any other man in the village. They shipped on the great sailing ships that went out on the white tides to brave the restless grey ocean and make ports in strange lands. I mind there were swift times in the little sea-coast village of Faring, when John Coolrick came home, with his furtive Lylip at his side, swaggering down the gangplank in his tarry sea clothes, and the broad leather belt that held his ever-ready dagger, shouting condescending greeting to some favoured acquaintance, kissing some maiden who ventured too near, then up the street, rolling some scarcely decent song of the sea. Other cringers and the idlers, the hangers-on, would swarm about the two desperate heroes, flattering and smirking, guffawing hilariously at each nasty jest. For to the tavern loafers, and some of the weaker among the straightforward villagers, these men with their wild talk and their brutal deeds, their tales of the seven seas and their far countries, these men, I say, were valiant knights, nature's noblemen, who dared to be men of blood and brawn. And all feared them, for that when a man was beaten, or a woman insulted, the villagers muttered, and did nothing. And so when Moll Farrell's niece was put to shame by John Coolrick, no one dared even to put in words what all thought. Moll had never married, and she and the girl lived alone in a little hut down close by the beach, so close that in high tide the waves came almost to the door. The people of the village accounted old Moll something of a witch, and she was a grim, gaunt old dame who had little to say to anyone, but she minded her own business, and eked out a slim living by gathering clams and picking up bits of driftwood. The girl was a pretty foolish little thing, vain and easily befooled, else she had never yielded to the shark-like blandishments of John Coolrick. I mind the day. It was a cold winter day, with a sharp breeze out of the east, when the old dame came into the village, shrieking that the girl had vanished. All scattered over the beach and back among the bleak inland hills to search for her, all save John Coolrick and his cronies who sat in the tavern, dicing and topping. All the while beyond the shoals, we heard the never-ceasing droning of the heavy, restless grey monster, and at the dim light of the ghostly dawn, Moll Farrell's girl came home. The tides bore her gently across the wet sands, laid her almost at her own door. Virgin white she was, and her arms were folded across her still bosom. Calm was her face, and the grey tides sighed about her slender limbs. Moll Farrell's eyes were stones, yet she stood above her dead girl and spoke no word till John Coolrick and his crony came reeling down from the tavern, their drinking jack still in their hands. Drunk was John Coolrick, and the people gave back for him, murder in their souls. So he came and laughed at Moll Farrell across the body of her girl.
"Zounds!"
swore John Coolrick.
"The wench has drowned herself, Lylip."
Lylip laughed, with the twist of his thin mouth. He always hated Moll Farrell, for it was she that had given him the name Lylip. Then John Coolrick lifted his drinking jack, swaying on his uncertain legs.
"A health to the wench's ghost,"
he bellowed, while all stood aghast. Then Moll Farrell spoke, and the words broke from her in a scream which sent ripples of cold up and down the spines of the throng.
"The curse of the foul fiend upon you, John Coolrick,"
she screamed.
"The curse of God rest upon your vile soul throughout eternity. May you gaze on sights that shall sear the eyes of you and scorch the soul of you. May you die a bloody death and wreathe in hell's flames for 1,000,000 and 1,000,000 and yet 1,000,000 years. I curse you by sea and by land, by earth and by air, by the demons of the oceans and the demons of the swamplands, the fiends of the forests and the goblins of the hills, and you."
A lean finger stabbed at Lylip Canoe, and he started backwards, his face paling.
"You shall be the death of John Coolrick, and he shall be the death of you. You shall bring John Coolrick to the doors of hell, and John Coolrick shall bring you to the gallows tree. I set the seal of death upon your brow, John Coolrick. You shall live in terror and die in horror, far out upon the cold grey sea. But the sea that took the soul of innocence to her bosom shall not take you, but shall fling forth your vile carcass to the sands. I, John Coolrick.
And she spoke with such a terrible intensity that the drunken mockery on the man's face changed to one of swinish stupidity.
The sea roars for the victim it will not keep. There is snow upon the hills, John Coolrick, and ere it melts your corpse will lie at my feet, and I shall spit upon it and be content.
Coolrick and his cronies sailed at dawn for a long voyage, and Mole went back to her hut and her clam gathering. She seemed to grow leaner and more grim than ever, and her eyes smoldered with the light not sane. The days glided by and people whispered among themselves that Mole's days were numbered, where she faded to a ghost of a woman, where she went her way, refusing all aid. That was a short, cold summer, and the snow on the barren inland hills never melted, a thing very unusual, which caused much comment among the villagers. At dusk and at dawn, Mole would come up on the beach, gaze up on the snow which glittered on the hills, then out to sea with a fierce intensity in her gaze. Then the days grew shorter, the nights longer and darker, and the cold grey tides came sweeping along the bleak strands, bearing the rain and sleet of the sharp east breezes. And upon a bleak day, a trading vessel sailed into the bay and anchored, and all the idlers and the wastrels flocked to the wharfs, for that was the ship upon which John Coolrick and Lilac Canoe had sailed. Down the gangplank came Lilac, more furtive than ever, but John Coolrick was not there. Two shouted queries. Canoe shook his head.
Coolrick deserted ship at a port of Sumatra,
said he.
He had a row with the skipper lads. Wanted me to desert too, but no. I had to see you fine lads again, eh boys?
Almost cringing was Lilac Canoe, and suddenly he recoiled as Mole Ferrell came through the throng. A moment they stood eyeing each other. Then Mole's grim lips bent in a terrible smile.
There's blood on your hand, Canoe.
She had lashed out suddenly, so suddenly that Lilac started and rubbed his right hand across his left sleeve.
Stand aside, witch,
he snarled in sudden anger, striding through the crowd which gave back for him. His admirers followed him to the tavern. Now, I mind that the next day was even colder. Grey fogs came drifting out of the east and veiled the sea and the beaches. There would be no sailing that day, and so all the villagers were in their snug houses or matching tales at the tavern. So it came about that Joe, my friend, a lad of my own age, and I were the ones who saw the first of the strange things that happened. Being harum-scarum lads of no wisdom, we were sitting in a small rowboat, floating at the end of the wharfs, each shivering and wishing the other would suggest leaving, there being no reason whatever for our being there, save that it was a good place to build air castles undisturbed. Suddenly, Joe raised his hand.
Say,
he said,
d'ye hear? Who can be out on the bay upon a day like this?
Nobody. What'd you hear?
Oars, or I'm a lubber. Listen.
There was no seeing anything in that fog, and I heard nothing. Yet Joe swore he did. Suddenly his face assumed a strange look.
Somebody rowing out there, I tell you. The bay's alive with oars from the sound. A score of boats at the least. Ye dolt, can you not hear?
Then, as I shook my head, he leaped and began to undo the painter.
I'm off to sea. Name me a liar if the bay's not full of boats, all together like a close fleet. Are you with me?
Yes, I was with him, though I heard nothing. Then out in the greyness we went, and the fog closed behind, and before so that we drifted in a vague world of smoke. Seeing naught and hearing naught, we were lost in no time, and I cursed Joe for leading us upon a wild goose chase that was like to end without being swept out to sea. I thought of Mole Ferrell's girl and shuddered. How long we drifted I know not. Minutes faded into hours, hours into centuries, till Joe swore he heard the oars, now close at hand, now far away, and for hours we followed them, steering our course toward the sound. As the noise grew and receded, this I later thought of, and could not understand. Then, when my hands were so numb that I could no longer hold the oar, and the forerunning drowsiness of cold and exhaustion was stealing over me, bleak white stars broke through the fog, which glided suddenly away, fading like a ghost of smoke. and we found ourselves afloat just outside the mouth of the bay. The waters lay smooth as a pond, all dark green and silver in the starlight, and the cold came crisper than ever. I was swinging the boat about to put back into the bay when Joe gave a shout, and for the first time I heard the clack of oarlocks. I glanced over my shoulder and my blood went cold. A great beaked prow loomed above us, a weird, unfamiliar shape against the stars, and as I caught my breath, sheared sharply and swept by us, with a curious swishing I never heard any other craft make. Joe screamed and backed oars frantically, and the boat walled out the way just in time. Although the prow had missed us, still otherwise we had died. For from the sides of the ship stood long oars, bank upon bank which swept her along. Though I had never seen such craft, I knew her for a galley, but what was she doing upon our coasts? They said, the farfarers, that such ships were still in use among the heathens of Barbary, but it was many along, even mild to Barbary, and even so, she did not resemble the ships described by those who had sailed far. We started in pursuit, and this was strange, for though the waters broke about her prow, she seemed fairly to fly through the waves, yet she was making little speed, and it was no time before we caught up with her, making our painter fast to a chain, far back beyond the reach of the swishing oars. We hailed those on deck, but they came no answer, and at last, conquering our fears, we clambered up the chain and found ourselves upon the strangest deck man has trod for many a long, roaring century.
"This is no Barbary, rover,"
muttered Joe fearsomely.
"Look, how old it seems, almost ready to fall to pieces. Why, 'tis fairly rotten."
There was no one on deck, no one at the long sweep with which the craft was steered. We stole to the hold and looked down the stair. Then and there, if ever men were on the verge of insanity, it was we, for there were rovers there. It is true, they sat upon the rowers and drove their creaking oars through the grey waters, and they that rowed were skeletons. Shrieking, we plunged across the deck to fling ourselves into the sea. But at the rail I tripped upon something and fell headlong, and as I lay, I saw a thing which vanquished my fear of the horrors below for an instant. The thing upon which I had tripped was a human body, and at the dim grey light that was beginning to steal across the eastern waves, I saw a dagger hilt standing up between his shoulders. Joe was at the end of the rail, urging me to haste, and together we slid down the chain and cut the painter. Then we stood off into the bay. Drayton kept the grim galley, and we followed, slowly, wondering. She seemed to be heading straight for the beach beside the wharf, and as we approached, we saw the wharfs thronged with people. They had missed us, no doubt, and now they stood there in the early dawn light, struck dumb by the apparition which had come out of the night and the grim ocean. Straight on swept the galley, her oars a swish. Then ere she reached the shallow water, crash! A terrific reverberation shook the bay. Before our eyes the grim craft seemed to melt away. Then she vanished, and the green waters seethed where she had ridden. But there floated no driftwood there, nor did there ever float any ashore. Aye, something floated ashore, but it was grim driftwood. We made the landing amid a hum of excited conversation that stopped suddenly. More Farrell stood before her hut, lying gauntly against the ghostly dawn, a lean hand pointing seaward and across the sight and wet sands. Borne by the grey tide, something came floating, something that the waves dropped at Moll Farrell's feet, and there looked up at us, as we crowded about, a pair of unseeing eyes set in a still, white face. John Coolrack had come home. Still and grim he lay, rocked by the tide, and as he lurched sideways, all saw the dagger hilt that stood from his back. The dagger all of us had seen 1,000 times, at the belt of Lilip Canoe.
"Aye, I killed him,"
came Canoe's shriek as he wreathed and grovelled before our gaze.
"At sea on a still night, in a drunken brawl, I slew him and hurled him overboard, and from the far seas he has followed me."
His voice sank to a hideous whisper.
"Because of the curse, the sea would not keep his body."
And the wretch sank down, trembling, the shadow of the gallows already in his eyes.
Aye!
Strong, deep, and exultant was Moll Farrell's voice.
From the hell of lost craft, Satan sent a ship of bygone ages. A ship red with gore and stained with the memory of horrid crimes. None other would bear such a vile carcass. The sea has taken vengeance and has given me mine. See now how I spit upon the face of John Coolrick.
And with a ghastly laugh, she pitched forward, the blood starting to her lips, and the sun came up across the restless sea.